Hello everyone. Today we are going to be figuring out some way to rebalance a few Pokemon types. Near the start of the year I complained and ranted about ice types, their contradictory design, and other issues. There will be a card in the top right that links to the trilogy right now. Check it out. I explained a lot of the design philosophy I have when it comes to games I enjoy playing, and the preferences I have. Now, what seemed to confuse a lot of people in the last videos was how Pokemon was initially conceived and designed. It's a popular idea that Pokemon type interactions were intended to remain static because developers ascribed each type a specific identity. That's not correct, especially not now. And it's really clear that Game Freak's current behavior doesn't line up with that philosophy. This is something I have to address before rebalancing the types, and why I decided to make this all one video. It's relevant, I don't want to repeat it, and you wouldn't want to hear it 18 times in 18 videos for all 18 types. Pokemon wasn't as planned out as many people seem to think. They weren't sure it was going to be popular, so it's not like they planned to make 9 generations and 1,000 Pokemon. Pokemon is a single-player game series with multiplayer capability. The multiplayer battling was a fun side feature to get as much mileage out of their game and the Game Link cable. They were not trying to become an e-sport. So as a mainly single-player experience, there needed to be a sense of progression. In many games, there is something of a bell curve for the power level of various skills, abilities, characters, tools, and so on. This is especially true in games like Pokemon, which is first and foremost a single-player turn-based JRPG. There needs to be abilities, items, characters, and skills that suit each segment of the game. This is why the Pokemon in early areas tend to be mooks. Even if there are some Pokemon that will eventually turn into a really statistically strong Pokemon, they often require investment, so you will still have to participate in the Tackle Fest for a good while. Generation 1 was very close to classic JRPGs when it came to enemy design and tropes. You've got the early game overworld monsters that spam basic attacks so that you learn the balance between damage and healing. Then comes the enemies that use status effects in conjunction with attack. Then there are the enemies that use buffs and debuffs along with attacks and status. Then finally the first boss, which encourages you to use magic by being weak to it or having stats vulnerable to magic. If you don't have magic, you can eke out a victory by strategically buffing, debuffing, or statusing to support your attacks. Think about how many games did this back then and still do it now. When video games were new, developers sometimes used a successful standard as a baseline, then added their own twist to it. There was nothing wrong with that. Mario was a platforming gold standard for 2D and 3D. Tons of developers used it as a baseline to make their games. 2D fighters, 3D fighters, racing games, sports games, a lot of genres can follow a standard. Even this YouTube video that you're watching right now is following something of a standard. I talk about Pokemon using publicly available images to express my opinions about Pokemon, then people watch it and comment unhinged things like, disagree, ice is a glass cannon, we should remove the ice resistance, and we should add key types instead like Goku and Vegeta, then make ice the only type super effective on them. That is how this works, and I probably wouldn't change that because it's funny to me and other viewers. So I ask you, what is the identity of Pokemon and their types? The answer is whatever the developers needed to get the game out functionally and still be fun. What the developers put out may not have been their perfect vision, but it was good enough and retained enough of their vision. A lot of the decisions made were things that ended up changing in Generation 2 based on reception and their own desires. Ice used to be neutral against fire, Psychic was immune to ghosts. Lick was the only conventional damaging ghost move. Dragons had no conventional damaging moves, so most people had no way of knowing Dragon beats Dragon just from playing the game. Half the types aren't even elements. They're classifications, concepts, or traits. There was going to be a bird type, and that classification became the normal flying dual types. So many of these anomalies have answers, but the reasons are usually things like coding error, not enough space, we changed the battle system, we added a new mechanic, we scrapped that idea, we thought this would be fun. Even Mew being squeezed into the game at the last second was a silly little it would be fun kind of decision, and that was a key part of Pokemon history. Pokemon has grown past its history, and the developers are willing to change the game and go back on any identities that they or we ascribe, because the game is anything the developers want to make of it. They've added Dark and Steel in Generation 2 for variety and as reparations for Psychic types. They nerfed Steel in Generation 6, taking away its resistance to Dark and Ghost. They also added Fairy, adding weaknesses to Dark, Dragon, and Fighting. Fairy also gave Poison type something to hit super effectively other than just Grass, and gives Steel a third type to hit. If Pokemon sees it fit to keep improving types, then clearly Identity isn't rigid. Okay, the final stretch. While I explain my changes, there are a few more things I want you to consider. 1. I am not prioritizing thematics and lore. It's certainly nice to have thematic and lore reasons for type interactions, but when you really look at the type chart, there hasn't been a single official iteration where every single interaction makes sense. The game would be miserable if we did. In reality, insects lose to basically everything, and basically everything loses to a metal bullet. We could use any amount of semantics to argue for and against any type interaction. So I'll try to include thematics since it helps people remember the type chart, but don't expect it to be an impactful factor of my decision. 2. I am factoring in every type of Pokemon gameplay. Single player, competitive singles, competitive doubles, spin-off games like Pokemon Ranger and Pokemon Mystery Dungeon. Pokemon is more than VGC, Smogon, and Nuzlocke. 3. I'm only going to change type interactions. I'm not going to buff individual Pokemon, abilities, items, or moves right now because that's way too indirect. Also, as of Generation 8, we've experienced Dexit, or the reality that there is no longer a guarantee that all Pokemon will be accessible for transfer to a new Pokemon game. We have no way of knowing which Pokemon will be available in the next games, so it doesn't make sense to use these indirect solutions. If a village is starving, you teach the whole village to fish and farm. You don't just give a slice of bread to one person then leave, right? If you skipped or missed this explanation, I really can't help you. I'm really sorry. Now, let's get to the type interactions. Bug-type Pokemon make up about 9% of all Pokemon in the series. Offensively, it is overall a weak and heavily resisted attacking type. Defensively, they have an average amount of weaknesses and resistances. Bug's biggest glaring issue is how heavily resisted it is as an attacking type, and it seems that way purely based on the reasoning that bugs are fragile in real life. That's true, but Pokemon is a fantasy game where bugs are pretty big, with some being as large as adults. Pokemon already ignores all the logic and reality of bugs by ignoring how a bug's small size is why some of them can breathe, climb, and be super strong. From a game mechanic perspective, I'm not seeing why it needs to be so resisted. There is already 2 great systems in place to show that some bugs are weak and some bugs are strong. Some early game bug types level up and evolve fully very quickly. They teach new players about evolution. They might be strong in the very early game, but their often low base stat total prevents them from performing as well as other Pokemon throughout the game. Bugs that are more late game are allowed to be strong because they are rarer, require the usual amounts of experience, and balanced around the late game. Base stat total and experience gain is already a great way to diversify the power level of bugs casually without hindering all bugs in competitive play. Going back to the topic of battle balance, if something is going to be that heavily resisted, you'd expect there to be something to offset it. The concept of trade-offs, right? Strong but slow, fast but frail. That's pretty common for there to be a give and take. There isn't really a give and take for bug. They're highly resisted, but nothing. They hit 3 average types super effectively, resist 3 average types, and are resisted by top types. There's no trade-off aside from Game Freak aggressively stat padding bug types that they needed to be good. Other types make off like bandits with their trade-offs. For example, Steel has a ton of resistances and an immunity, but an average amount of weaknesses. They barely offset it by making 4 things resist Steel, and only allowing Steel to hit 3 things super effectively. Or what about Fighting? It's resisted by a bunch of things, but super effectively hits 5 types, including the highly resistant Steel. There should be a concept of give and take, and Bug was robbed blind. Even when they added Fairy to the game, and had a chance to adjust types, they made it resist Bug. Why? People tried justifying Fairy resisting Bug because they live among each other. If that was the case, they would have mutually resisted each other, but they don't. To address these issues, let's try reversing the Bug and Fairy interactions. Fairy no longer resists Bug, and Bug resists Fairy. Fairy is strong against 3 important types, has a strong immunity, and good resists. It can deal with having a slightly worse matchup with Bug. Bug also resists poison now. There was even a point in Generation 1 when these types were super effective on each other. They were both bad types, so the easiest way to buff them at the time was to stop them from being super effective on each other. We're expanding on that initial change to make them mutually resist each other. Bugs use poisons and can even mutate to gain poison resistance. Bugs are now no longer resisted by Ghost. Lastly, bugs are also now immune to being confused. Probably not the most impactful change, but why not? Confusion is luck-based anyway, and usually applied as a secondary effect competitively. Casually, it's a nice little boost to bugs against confusion spam. I'm sure you can argue about how easy it is to disorient bugs in real life, but it doesn't matter. The electric type immunity to paralysis has logical exceptions too. You can't paralyze electric types anymore, even if it's nerve damage like breaking their spine with body slam. Overall, it's harmless, so let Bug get a rare W. Ice's offenses are fine. It hits 4 things and is resisted by 4 things. Ice's defenses are terrible, and because a ton of ice types are slow and defensive, only resisting ice is bad. People justified this because the most successful and visible ice types have been glass cannons. I get it. Attacking, damage boosts, and pressing A is very fun. But as soon as we get a region where only the defensive ice types are available, you'll understand what I'm getting at. The pain of switching in, taking a ton of damage, and then getting hit again before you can move, and dying, because you only resist ice. Ice now also resists electric and water. It's no longer weak to rock. Ice now has 3 weaknesses and 3 resistances. You'll notice that I've reverted my decision to make ice resist ground, at least if you've seen my other video. You'll see why later on. Rock was made out to be this difficult to deal with tanky type, or at least in the early game and some other media. In older games where Pokemon had worse coverage and misaligned stats, Rock just barely could be seen as a tanky type. However, now that fighting actually has decent moves, and normal type spam isn't the meta, Rock is a pretty terrible type to have defensively. Don't get me wrong, spamming Rock type moves is great, and being a fast Rock type, or being Tyranitar, is great. But many Rock types are not fast, nor are they Tyranitar. To give Rock a little love, let's try making Rock now resist Rock, and break Stealth Rocks when switching in. It will no longer be weak to ground. I get that people also use Sandstorms as an example of ground eroding Rock, but Sandstorm is a Rock move, and Sandstream is given to both Rock and ground types. I get that the idea is that ground erodes or destabilizes Rock, or that earthquakes destroy large concrete structures and all of that stuff, but Rock and ground are part of the Rock cycle, just like how water and ice are part of the water cycle. They're similar types, but are not the same type because they interact with different types depending on what specific form they are at the time. Water is absorbed by grass and quenches fire in its liquid and neutral temperature form. Ice ruins grass and loses its cold traits when hit by fire. This is like how ground in its soil, clay, or muddy form is different from rock in its boulder, crystal, or gemstone forms. Different forms of the same type deviating enough to have different traits. Who knows, maybe down the line we get a plasma type as a different typing for flying or electric, depending on how you see it. Man, it's so much like the derivative breathing styles of Demon Slayer or Naruto's chakra nature transformations. I'll stop before this tangent gets any worse. Overall, Rock hits 4 things and is resisted by 4 things. Rock has 1 less weakness and 1 more resistance. Plus, it straight up breaks the most consistent hazard in history just by switching in. Grass has access to many status and health draining effects. They also negate grassy powder moves and leaf seeds. Similar to Bug, the type is highly resisted. On top of that, they are drowning in weaknesses. They struggle to attack and defend. Their biggest strength is hitting ground, rock, and water, or resisting ground, water, electric, and opposing grass. Grass so far has been the most difficult to adjust because none of its interactions are free. Each time I removed an offensive resist or removed a weakness, it caused a chain reaction that caused me to have to abandon almost all type chart logic. It's a really rough puzzle and makes me wish we had more elements as opposed to so many abstract concepts as types. Since this is an experiment and luckily not something people are forced to change, let's test making grass a specialist. It still has 5 weaknesses, but is only resisted by 6 types now. Flying no longer resists grass, but flying stays super effective on grass. Grass will lean harder into resistances by now gaining 2, Fairy and Ghost. The lore? Plants and plant products have many alleged applications that allow them to repel evil spirits or fairies. Gourds and turnips are sometimes made into lanterns to repel ghosts. Some cultures believe gourds can be used to trap ghosts, which is very sustainable compared to using a thermos. Fairies are said to be repelled by various types of flowers and herbs as well, so similar reasoning there. Mechanically, grass hits 3 key types and must use status and lifesteal to get around the 6 things that resist it. It has 5 weaknesses, so don't be afraid that with all the status, lifesteal, and raw healing, grass will make stall unbreakable. Grass has 6 very strong resistances, granting many chances to switch in and start setting up effects. Offensive grass types may still have trouble dealing damage because 6 resists is still a lot, but they certainly have more chances to get in at all. Poison is a tricky one. It's good defensively, especially when paired strategically with other types. It also has an immunity to being poisoned or badly poisoned, and absorbs toxic spikes, which are other great defensive tools. Aside from Generation 1, Poison only hit grass super effectively. Really, all the way until fairies were introduced, Poison only hit grass. 4 whole generations. Yet, it was resisted by 4 things and Steel was immune to it entirely. I wanted to try giving Poison one more thing to hit super effectively and was looking at Flying and Water because of their strength as types and because it would be easy to explain away as pollution. I decided to choose Water since I already took away Flying's ability to resist grass. Poison will not resist water in return. Water is an amazing type, so I'm fine with letting an offensively weaker type hit an amazing offensive and defensive type hard. Water will be fine. It still has 4 amazing resists compared to its now 3 weaknesses. It still hits a ton of types just fine. And of course, since water is such a common type, you will have a large variety of amazing dual types to choose from. Poison will be valuable to cover the big boys, Fairy and Water, in one move slot. Lastly, Ghost will no longer resist poison. Ghost has 2 weaknesses, 2 immunities, trapping immunity, and is still offensively fine. Ghost still has immunity to useful moves like Rapid Spin, Fake Out, and Extreme Speed. These changes could potentially make Poison a little more relevant offensively. That's the proposed changes for the rest of the types that seem to be weaker. I'll put an updated type chart on the screen for your viewing pleasure. Overall, adjusting the other types isn't as easy as fixing Ice. Like for Ice, they forgot to code resistances for 2 decades for a bunch of fat, slow Ices. Easy fix, give them resistances, and it doesn't step on any toes. The other weaker types are like a seesaw over lava. You start to lift one up, and the other starts falling down into the lava. That's why I don't heavily criticize Game Freak for difficult balancing decisions like trying to please competitive, casual, new, and veteran players all at once. That's hard to do in plenty of situations, but I'll totally roast them like I did in my Ice videos because they had multiple options for designing and fixing Ice and chose none of them. This new type chart isn't perfect, but hopefully tightens up that bell curve a little so that there aren't mile-wide gaps between the worst types and the average types. This is a conceptual discussion and not an official Pokemon release, so we can make further adjustments in the future. Please also keep in mind that theory crafting only gets you so far. It would be so much better and more enlightening to try it in an actual gameplay. By gameplay, I mean both playing an entire campaign with these changes, or having competitive singles and doubles matches with the changes. Testing all of that would be great fun, even if the new balancing creates new issues. It'd honestly be pretty fun to try multiple iterations of type changes in a real game. Trial and error is part of the process, and to create anything meaningful, I can't be afraid to jump into that process. Lastly, I'd highly recommend trying other RPGs with different weakness systems, especially if Pokemon is the only game you play. Broaden your experience with different battle systems and mechanics. Maybe even discover that another series with the difficulty and mechanics you like has existed all along. Octopath Traveler, Persona, mainline Shin Megami Tensei, Yokai Watch, Yakuza Like a Dragon, even action games like Monster Hunter. Variety is good, and I can't recommend it enough. That's all I've got. Tell me what you think and how you would rebalance the type chart in the comments. I'll see you later.